Daniel and Revelation, Lesson 7. Reading from Daniel 8, 1 through 14. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, the first king of Babylon, a vision appeared to me, Daniel. And that vision came 2 years after the first one I saw in the 1st year of Belshazzar. So these 2 visions came 2 years apart to Daniel. He did not receive them all at once. So let's go back and read a little bit about that first vision he saw out of Daniel chapter 7, verses 1 through 3. In the 1st year of the reign of Belshazzar, the king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while upon his bed. Then Daniel wrote down the main facts of the dream. In my vision I beheld the 4 winds of heaven stirring the great sea, that is, the masses of people on earth, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea of people, each one different from the others. Now those 4 beasts symbolized 4 historical kingdoms that would rule the world from Daniel's day until Jesus sets up his eternal earthly kingdom. So let's look at them. Earlier, God showed King Nebuchadnezzar a human history, all 4 kingdoms from his day till Jesus sets up his kingdom. But he showed it to Nebuchadnezzar in the form of a giant image made of different kinds of metals, shaped like a man. And Daniel interpreted that dream for Nebuchadnezzar. He saw human kingdoms, the times of the Gentiles, when the Gentiles will rule the world before Jesus takes over and sets up his kingdom that will rule forever and ever. Daniel said in that image, made of different metals, the head of gold represented Babylon. The chest and arms of silver represented Medo-Persia. The midsection of bronze represented Greece. And then the legs, made of iron, represented the kingdom of Rome. And the rock that you see here that was cut out of a mountain without human hands, in other words, it was all of God, is Jesus Christ destroying these Gentile kingdoms, the 10 kings. This is the end time before Jesus takes over. The feet and toes were made of clay and iron, some strong, some weak. But Jesus takes over after the Antichrist reigned for 7 years and sets up his eternal kingdom. Well, Daniel saw the same kingdoms, but he saw them in the form of vicious beasts. God showed Daniel in that dream in chapter 7 of Daniel. Babylon was represented by a lion with wings on its back, and Medo-Persia was represented by a bear which is raised up on one side, because the 2 kingdoms, the Medes and the Persians, were strong and they took over, the Medes first, but eventually the Persians took over, and so represented by a bear, the Persians were stronger in the end before Greece took over, and so the bear is shown lifted up on one side. The 3rd kingdom that Daniel saw was Greece, and represented by a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. The wings represented the speed by which Alexander took over the kingdoms of the world at that time, and the 4 heads represent the 4 generals that Alexander had, and after he died, they took over his kingdom. They could never make it as strong as Alexander had, so there are 4 heads, and the Bible has more to say about that. The 4th kingdom, Rome, Daniel saw as a vicious beast, more like a robot, the way it was described, than an animal, with the iron teeth and brass claws. And he also on his head had 10 horns. Now those 10 horns will be at the end of the Roman Empire influence on world kingdoms, the very end before Jesus takes over. And the 10 horns are the same as the 10 toes on the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw. So God showed it to this king, this earthly king, human history in the form of a man, in an image, but Daniel saw the same history of these same 4 kingdoms as vicious beasts. Now back to Daniel chapter 8. In Daniel's first vision of history, he saw Medo-Persia represented by a bear lifted up on one side, which meant that eventually the Persians took over the Medes and became the stronger of the 2 in that nation. In the second vision, Daniel saw the Medes and the Persians in the form of a ram with two horns. One horn was higher than the other one, and the higher one came up last, which is the very same thing as the bear lifted up on one side. It showed the same history, and you can read that in history if you study it. Also in the second vision, Daniel saw Greece as a goat, whereas in the first vision he saw Greece as a leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. The difference is God had a different purpose in these visions than he did in the earlier vision, and that's what Daniel is getting across to us in chapter 8. Daniel said, I saw in the second vision that I was in Shushan, the citadel, in the province of Elam. And I saw in that vision that I was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted my eyes and saw standing beside the river a ram that had 2 horns, as pictured here. And the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher horn came up last. The Persians eventually dominated the Medes in that kingdom. Then Daniel said, I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no animal could withstand him, and there was no power that could deliver anyone out of his hand. But he did according to his will and became great. And as I was observing, suddenly a male goat came from the west, representing Greece. Now, the goat symbolized the Greek Empire because their citizens were originally known as the goat people, from the word "aigos," goat. Daniel again said, as I was observing, suddenly. That shows how fast Alexander came across that part of the world and conquered all the kingdoms as he went and took over. In 13 years, Alexander conquered the known world at that time. As I was observing, suddenly a male goat came from the west across the surface of the whole earth without even touching the earth. And the goat had a notable horn between its eyes. Then he came to the ram which had 2 horns, which I had seen standing beside the river, and the goat ran at the ram with furious power. I saw him confronting the ram. He was moved with rage against him, attacked the ram, and broke off the 2 horns. So he defeated both the Medes and the Persians in that battle. The ram had no power to withstand the goat, but the goat cast the ram down to the ground and then trampled him, and there was no one that could deliver the ram from his hand. Therefore, the male goat, symbolizing the kingdom of Greece and its first king, Alexander, grew great. But when he, Alexander, became strong, the large horn, who was Alexander, was broken. You see, Alexander finally reached India, where he died of a fever at 33 years old. Then, in the place of the first horn, Alexander, 4 notable horns came up on the goat, facing toward the 4 winds of heaven, the 4 directions on the compass, north, south, east, and west, his 4 generals. The 4 smaller kingdoms formed from Alexander's Grecian Empire would be the modern nations of Greece, Syria, Turkey, and Egypt. And now notice, out of one of those 4 horns, representing the kingdoms his 4 generals took over, dividing his kingdom up after Alexander died, out of one of those 4 divisions of his empire came a little horn. That always refers to the Antichrist. The little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south and east and toward the glorious land of Israel. You see, this is a prophecy that refers to the end time. We're told that later. And the little horn grew up to the host of heaven. This actually refers to Jewish leaders as they were known. And the Antichrist, the little horn, cast down some of the host and some of the stars to the ground and trampled them. Therefore, this has to be people, not literal stars. And it depicts some of the actions of the Antichrist in the last days, according to Daniel 8:17. The Antichrist will come out of one of the 4 divisions of the empire Alexander built. Thus he will come from Greece, Turkey, or Syria, because Egypt will be the king of the south, as we will discover in a later chapter of Daniel. In Daniel's vision, that little horn exalted himself, which is exactly what the Antichrist will do in these last days. Exalted himself as high as a prince of the host, that is the future Jewish high priest. And by him, the Antichrist, the daily sacrifices will be taken away, and the place of the sanctuary as well. The altar and other sacrificial equipment will be cast down, and then the image of the beast, the abomination of desolation, spoken of in Daniel 12:11 and Matthew 24:15, will be set up in the place of the sacrificial system. Because of transgression, that is, unloyal, disloyal people in Israel itself, because of transgression of some of those Israelites, an army was given over to the little horn to oppose the daily sacrifices. And he cast truth down to the ground. Folks, we're seeing that very thing happen today in the United States of America and in other countries around the world. Truth is being cast down to the ground. Therefore, the stage is being set for the onset of the Antichrist, for him to show up in this world after the church is raptured out of it. And he did all of that and prospered, or succeeded. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and then another holy one said to that first one who was speaking, "How long will the vision last concerning the removal of those daily temple sacrifices and the transgression of desolation standing in the holy place? And the giving of both the sanctuary and the host, the people, to be trampled underfoot. And the angel said unto me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings." It takes two to make one day, so this is 1,150 days, not 2,300 days, 2,300 evenings and mornings. That's 1,150 days, which is very close to 3.5 years, which shows up over and over in these prophetic scriptures. So it's not 2,300 days or years, as some teach, but evenings and mornings. And we'll find out more truth, interesting truth, very important information in our next lesson on Daniel and Revelation.